This technology is so transformational that, on the downside, if we don't adopt it rapidly, we risk truly bringing to end a very long chapter in British history where we have been one of the richest countries in the world, one of the most advanced economies in the world. And if you were to invent a technology revolution where Britain was positioned to benefit disproportionately, win unfairly, it would be this one. It's not the technology that will do it, it's us.
So perhaps, Tom, I could just turn to you first. You've obviously gone from government into startup world, dressed for the occasion, as you can see. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what Fractile's doing and to a wide audience of probably experts and maybe people who don't understand quite as much. It'd be great to hear.
Thank you. And sorry, I forgot this was a centre-right event and I forgot to bring my suit. But firstly, thanks so much for having me. This is a great discussion to have. For people that don't know, Fractile, we're a British-based AI chip design company. And what we're trying to do is solve this fundamental challenge that is plaguing this rapid multi-trillion-dollar AI infrastructure build-out. What we're seeing at the moment is this explosion in tokens. So tokens are representations of words or lines of code or images. And this scale of demand is increasing at an exponential rate. And what we're seeing at the same time as this explosion in demand for tokens is the length of time at which AI systems can reliably do tasks is roughly doubling every 4 or so months. So what you're seeing, remember ChatGPT, Greg was talking about how they used ChatGPT in the early days in 2023. It was able to do vaguely impressive stuff, I'd say. But even now, if you just cast your mind even just a few years forward at the tasks it can do, it can sort of reason over much longer periods of time. It has multimodal capabilities, so can reason across images and text and code. And it's able to use tools. It's able to therefore do a much sort of wider array of tasks. And so as a result, this creates a huge economic incentive to be able to run models much more quickly and much more cost efficiently than we currently have, particularly as you have this explosion in inference costs, which is going to form the basis of both enterprise costs, but also be the key fundamental input into our labor market and wider prosperity. So we're basically designing AI hardware and building custom software in a very different way to try to offer what will be a step change in capability compared to the next generation of NVIDIA and other GPUs coming online. And we're a British company, and we're sort of a proudly British company. We've got a big office in London, but also a major office in Bristol as well. And we're really excited to be building a sort of strong manufacturing partnership with TSMC, which very few chip design companies on the continent have. And our first chips are coming, they're being fabricated at TSMC towards the end of this year and will be available for commercial deployment next year. So we're really excited as a company to sort of enter into this space where there's almost this bottomless pit of demand for AI compute right now. And so that creates all these phenomenal opportunities for emerging neo chips to come through and try and take a slice of the market.
Great, thank you. Louis, you've been in the media a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Perhaps you use this time to talk to people about Palantir, for those who don't know it, if you don't know it, and also perhaps debunk some of the myths that are out there at the moment swirling around social media.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. Yes, well, maybe to give those of you who haven't heard of Palantir a sense of where we fit into this AI story, we are one of those companies that sits downstream of what Tom was describing. So we depend on that world of infrastructure and chips that he described. We sit in the virtual layer, the software or application layer that sits atop that. We do two things. One is we help large complex organizations make use of the data they already hold. So let's give an example, the NHS. All of you will no doubt have had an interaction with the NHS and will know that every hospital you visit has dozens, if not hundreds, in some cases thousands of different IT systems in which different bits of information about each of us is held. In order to make a well-informed decision in the hospital, you are typically having to pull information from a subset of those systems that don't talk to each other. So our software solves that problem. Enables all of these different systems to talk to one another for the information that you need to make a better informed decision, to be there available at the right moment in time in front of the right person. But where AI becomes relevant is, as you'll all be familiar from any kind of modeling, if you put rubbish in, you're going to get rubbish out. And so it's incredibly important that as these models that the frontier labs are developing, so ChatGPT, as Tom mentioned as an example, if the data to which ChatGPT has access when it is being asked to reason or make a decision or infer something or summarize something is incomplete or incorrect, then you're going to get a very, very bad answer. And that's why you need that layer where the data is made sense of and accurate and holistic. And then you need a harness in which to run the model so that you can do that in a safe, transparent, auditable way. So you're certain of what's going in, you can be much more certain of what's coming out. So those are the two problems in a nutshell that Palantir solves for large, complex organizations.
I mean, maybe that takes me on to a question about data. Lots of conversations, of who owns the data, who should profit from it, and one of the UK's biggest assets is data, particularly in the public sector. So do you think we're using that advantage effectively?
Well, so yes and no. You're absolutely right to say that there's an enormous amount of value in data, and we here in the UK are blessed with a lot of it in a way that could be very valuable. But that value is largely latent. And you could think of it a bit, I mean, sometimes people say, that data is the new oil. And in that sense, the analogy is correct. I mean, oil in itself, as it comes out of the ground, is of limited value. And there's an enormous amount of processing and refining that needs to happen before it's turned into something that's really economically valuable. And I think the same applies here. And so we should be thinking about it that way. It's a slightly more nuanced answer. And that, of course, is, I think maybe as you're implying, something that we're often accused of somehow we want access to the data or we're spiriting it off to America, which is categorically untrue. It's simply misinformation. It's not our business model. It would be illegal for us to do it, but I'm afraid that hasn't stopped Zach Polanski and others claiming otherwise.
And Tom, obviously your work with the Sovereign AI Unit, you again were looking at this as it says in the tin. So what's your view on where does data go next and how do we maximise the benefits?
Well, one of the real privileges I had when I worked in government trying to set up the Sovereign AI Fund was trying to fund new novel data sets. So one of the projects I worked on was called the OpenBind Consortium. So this was a project trying to, so many of you may have heard of AlphaFold, which is one of the sort of most well-known big AI breakthroughs around this idea of protein folding. And we'd found this idea, this consortium had come to us and pitched us on this idea of this new consortium, which could 20x the relevant data on protein ligand interactions that basically were used to help underpin the AlphaFold revolution. So this was an 8 million sort of funding opportunity. It's this incredible thing, a total no-brainer. Isomorphic Labs wanted to be involved, one of the big AI for drug discovery spin-outs from DeepMind. Professor David Baker, who's just won the Nobel Prize for protein folding and his work on that, wanted to be involved. You have these amazing labs in Oxford that all wanted to be involved. And so you have these incredible funding opportunities lying around the corridors of Whitehall. But one of the big challenges I saw when I was working in there was you would have this idea, you take it to the commercial and legal teams, and you do your business case and so on, and they say, hey, this is all fine and well, but why aren't we doing this for a fair and open competition? Why aren't we opening this up to a wider procurement? Who are these? Who's David Baker? What's his deal? And so you're constantly being faced with these questions and challenges where I'm not saying we shouldn't have these open sort of procurement processes. I'm not saying we shouldn't scrutinize some of these projects that come across officials' desks. But it's quite interesting. There's a challenge when you're in government. If you want to be opportunistic, if you want to move quickly, if you want to have muscular industrial policy, that is rubbing up against what has been sort of decades-long approach of, we have we're anti-subsidy control, we're pro-subsidy control. We are very hesitant around the idea of picking winners. And whilst I understand that as an approach, it's something that I don't think the UK can afford to be asleep at the wheel on, because there are some fundamental challenges with us and our sort of ability to scale compared to some of the other countries. And so we need to be able to actually throw the kitchen sink at big opportunities when they come along. The problem is the way in which the British state is constructed, it makes it very hard to do that.
And maybe that takes us on to sort of, how do we stand out as a frontier for AI development, here in the UK, and what should we prioritise?
I think we are already the standout. I think we are the only country outside of the US, in the West broadly defined. The other country, of course, that's in this race is China. But we in Britain are the only other country that has even a pretense at being in this AI race. And to just give you an example, so Palantir, we employ 20% of our global headcount in Britain. 1 in 5 of our employees anywhere in the world is here. That's not because it's not economically rational, frankly, for a company like Palantir to be that well represented in Britain right now. It's simply a function of the talent. The quality and quantity of engineering talent is here, it's in New York, and it's in Silicon Valley. It's really only in 3 places in the world at the moment. So that plus DeepMind, which has now become Google's frontier lab, which is building Gemini, which is one of the 3 really good AI models, is also based here. So we have, I think, in a way, stumbled almost accidentally into having a pretty significant hold on 2 of the key nodes in what is the emerging AI supply chain. And we've done that by accident, and we've done that because, and I could go into the reasons, but I think we have all sorts of competitive advantages that are deep cultural ones, geographic ones, linguistic ones, legal ones, that have set us up to benefit and win disproportionately in the AI race, despite some of the other things going on. And honestly, I think, yes, there are probably some, I agree with Tom, there's some very specific bets that we probably should take and that the government should lean into more. But I would come back to those general macro fixes that you'll all be very familiar with, which is we need to look at tax, we need to look at labor laws, we need to look at regulation. At the very moment when our labor force is about to undergo perhaps the largest disruption for centuries, we are in the process of tightening labor laws, which is going to make it harder for companies to adjust and frankly slow down the rate of AI adoption. And I think those levers those are the ones we should be really looking at, those macro levers. And it's not even drastic changes. It might just be bring them into line so that they're more or less competitive with other countries. We don't need necessarily to be more competitive because of the other natural advantages that we have.
Thanks. Tom?
Yeah. Just to pick up on your point around talent, Brian Eno has this saying of this idea of the genius. So this scene and genius kind of brought together. And he talks about how in these great periods of innovation, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, and so on, often new forms of knowledge were produced from different groups, different forms of expertise being tightly bound together in different communities. And that would spawn new forms of innovation and knowledge being produced. And I actually think the UK is the place where we can have the best genius when it comes to AI. At Fractile, we're enormous beneficiaries of the fact that we have 2 big offices, so one in London and one in Bristol. In London, as we were saying, we have the machine learning capital of Europe and arguably the world in terms of our kind of economic cost of this talent. But something that is seldom talked about is in Bristol, we have this phenomenal history of chip design in Bristol, kind of going back to companies such as ARM and so on. And so thanks to the Elizabeth line, we can get door to door from our Bristol office to our London office in 90 minutes. So this is able to bring these 2 very different worlds together. You see this in London as well with a company like 11 Labs, one of our sort of really, really great hopes in the AI space. You have, they're in Soho, go across the road to Carnaby Street, and you can meet with all the different creative ad execs that they want to do business with. If you're in the States, you don't have that privilege. You've got to take massive flights going, from the Bay Area to New York to DC and so on. So the real chance for us to be able to win in these areas that are at the kind of intersection of two frontiers, I think is something that is massively underrated in the UK.
Great. And obviously in the UK, it's very well known for starting tech firms. We've seen huge successes over the last 30 years, but criticism that we can't scale them, we haven't got a big enough market to scale them, and sometimes we sell out too early.
Yeah.
Do you think AI is our opportunity to be that leader? Can we scale, or do you think we're going to get overtaken by larger tech?
So before joining Fractile, I used to work in science and technology policy, and there was this meme that was said all the time that the UK is the best place to do research, but we're awful at commercializing. It's the best place to start a company, but we're awful at scaling. That has obviously been true. I don't think it's as true as perhaps it was 5 to 10 years ago. Just as an example, UK startups in Q1 of 2026 raised £7.8 billion alone. 3/4 of that was in AI. And just to put that into perspective with other sectors that we sort of laud as being key contributors to the economy, that is roughly 8 seasons of Premier League matchday revenue. So this enormous injection of capital, this incredible endorsement of UK companies. If you have world-class technologists in your company in the UK, you will be able to raise money. That wasn't necessarily the same a decade ago, but I do think that's changed. There are some areas where I think those scale-up gaps definitely exist, and we shouldn't be asleep at the wheel on that. So if you're in a sector that is much more reliant on public procurement, I think that will still be a challenge. There are some areas, if you're in the health biotech space, we have a massive challenge around clinical trials and access to clinical trials. Again, that is something that will be a constraint on our ability to scale companies. But actually, I think we're entering this quite exciting period where we're getting lots of companies raising really significant rounds and standing a real chance at building category-defining companies in Britain. What I think will be interesting to see, and the real answer to your question will be, we'll see the answer to that in 10 or so years' time. What I think the US has been able to benefit from over the course of the past kind of couple of decades of this technological development is this real compounding effect. People talk about PayPal mafia as sort of one example, but if you think about all of these people that go and build world-leading companies and then they go and spin out another one elsewhere, they then angel invest back into the ecosystem. We've not really done that because we've not had these breakout stars. I think we're about to see these breakout stars. And so the big question is going to be, can we continue to sort of circulate that capital and ambition? And I'm quite excited by the fact that the Anthropics and companies like this in the world are choosing London as their next big hub. People worry that it's competition for talent, and I understand that, but ultimately it's bringing in all this amazing machine learning talent. Some of them will go and spin out their own companies and build British companies. And so I think we're kind of entering this golden age for tech startups in Britain.
Great. And Louis, you've obviously seen this with a global company. What do you think about UK's ambition, and can we scale here?
Well, I think that the point Tom just made is spot on. These are concentrations of talent. There's a kind of agglomeration effect. And if you allow that to run for a sufficiently long time, you start to see these extraordinary compounding benefits. And that I think genuinely is the real deep value of having Google DeepMind stay here or Palantir have a big presence here, because we're magnets for talent, we're factories for talent, and the engineers we hire might stay with us 4 or 5 years, but then they'll leave and invariably they'll start their own company. And if they've done it, they've worked here, they'll probably start the company here. And you fast forward 20 years, I think a very significant part of the tech ecosystem in the UK, which may be a very, very significant part of our economy by then, will effectively be this alumni network, will be the mafia that Tom referred to. I mean, the example you gave, 11 Labs, which for those of you who don't know is probably the world's best AI voice company, was started in 2022 in London. recently raised a round at a valuation of $11 billion, so it's gone from 0 to 11 billion in 4 years, was started by some engineers that work for me on our NHS project, who happen to be Polish, but have moved here for university, then joined Palantir, then spun out. And we've only really had that scale presence here for 5 or 6 years. So think about what that could mean for the country in 10 or 15 years' time.
I just want to say thank you. We're handing over to how running a business next, so it'll be interesting to see. But thank you, Louis and Tom.